So think about this for a minute. Disney takes on the task of creating their first African American princess. Given their portrayal of black characters, do you think they'll make up for it?
Did you ever see an elephant fly?
Let's hope so. Granted, this movie came out years ago, I recently rediscovered it in theaters as part of this promotion through AMC Theaters, where they re-show a lot of the Disney animated princess movies. This week coming up, you're going to see Tangled, and then the week before, we got to see Princess and the Frog. And given that this movie was one of Disney's last traditionally animated movies, I had to see this again on the big screen. And trust me, I didn't regret it. First and foremost, seeing traditional animation like this done by Disney is a real joy. Granted, we're in a day and age where a lot of traditional animation is surviving in Japan and surprisingly on Netflix, but it's so great to see, and it gives me hope that maybe one day Disney will decide to revisit this. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but hey, one man can dream, right? As I mentioned before, this is Disney's first portrayal of an African American princess in their animated films. It makes you wonder why it took them this long, but then you consider Disney's portrayal of characters of color, well, yeah. It's funny how no matter what, and I just mentioned this joke in the beginning of the video, no matter what you say or do, this movie's over like 70 years old and people are still making the connection that Disney is racist.
Ah, that's good old-fashioned family racism.
It shows that Disney's got a lot of ground to make up for. And it's no surprise when I talk about this movie and Zootopia, which I'll talk about later for the sake of comparison, on how they portray race relations in their animated films as a way of being contemporary, as a way of talking about something that's relatable, something that's going on in today's society. But before we go into that, let's actually talk about the story. It's an adaptation of the fable The Frog Prince. A princess has to kiss the frog in order to turn him back into a prince. So instead of her turning him into a prince, because she's not technically a princess yet, she gets turned into a frog too, which I think is an interesting twist. And she has to find a way for her and the prince to become human again. We'll be human again, oh be human again. That's my ADD going off. Very random. With that being said, Tiana is not a princess at the start of the film, but she eventually grows into the role by the end of the film. Which is not something new that's happened in Disney movies. Belle didn't start off as a princess, and in some ways Cinderella wasn't really a princess either. But one thing I do appreciate about Tiana as a character is that she is hardworking, but something that doesn't really separate her from the other characters, because I do think as other princesses go, there are a lot of hardworking Disney princesses. You can argue that Snow White, even though she gets the prince by the end of the movie, is a hard worker, and the same can go for Cinderella as well. Are there princesses in the Disney pantheon that are kind of lazy and just get what they want? Yeah, to a certain degree, but I don't think it should be a knock to all the princesses in general. And I think it's relevant to talk about this now, given that Disney's making Wreck-It Ralph 2, and they have a scene with the Disney princesses where they actually make fun and talk about this joke within their movies. But most importantly, there's no denying that race plays a big role in this film. What I like about this film, it takes the general vibe of traditional African folklore, where there's a lot of talking animals, and then they infuse it with Louisiana, Creole type of culture, which really works for this film. And in some ways it's a good period piece for the 1920s. Not exactly like the greatest period piece, but they do capture the essence of that time. The idea that Tiana is a hard worker and she wants to get a restaurant and she has to work really hard in order to get what she wants is so relevant into this film. However, they don't deny the fact that this is a time where no matter how hard, now let's be honest, I rarely get political, no matter what, when you're in a time period where segregation exists, separate but equal, where you have this barrier keeping you from getting what you want even though you're working hard to get it, is very interesting. But it's interesting, even the song Tiana sings, Almost There, is represented for a lot of African Americans back in the day, and to certain degrees even today, who have to struggle really hard in order to succeed in a society which kind of pushes them down. And that's no more evident than with the scene where she was outbidded even though she had the money to get the restaurant, and they flat out tell her it's because of your background that you can't get the restaurant. For a lot of movies, that's pretty deep. Granted, it doesn't go nearly as deep as, say, Zootopia, which I think took a lot more risk when it talked about race relations than it did in Princess and the Frog. But granted, I think Zootopia was more of a response to cultural themes. At the time Princess and the Frog was making, affirmative action in animated films wasn't really a bad thing. Now that we're in this day and age where people have to complain about people of color being in animated films, it almost seems appropriate that they're acknowledging that so bluntly in Zootopia than they were in Princess and the Frog. It just shows that there's a change in time. Am I saying that they were downplaying the importance of that back in the day of Princess and the Frog? I don't think so, and they were addressing that it was something that needed to be talked about. But there was more of a fantasy vibe, which just goes back to the tradition of Disney princess movies, which then goes back to the style of this film, which is very cartoony. You've got a Three Stooges slapstick scene, which is very funny, and even the character Prince Naveen, when he's introduced, he has this great slapstick moment where he gets slapped with the book, and it always gets a laugh out of me, no matter what. One of your characters is a talking alligator, which the logic of having a talking alligator in the movie doesn't really make sense, but granted, hey, it's a fairy tale, we just buy into it. A talking alligator voiced by the plaint from The Little Shop of Horrors. Feed me. And when we're talking about race, we have characters that have to work hard, find out what it is they need versus what they want. And that's where you get the dynamic between the two characters, where you got Mama Odie and you got Dr. Facilier. And in some ways, Dr. Facilier represents what Tiana's wants are and what's pushing her back, because he as a character doesn't get what he wants, and he wants to succeed by making a lot of money, which granted doesn't seem like a big motivation, but through one scene where it's acknowledged that people don't give him a passing glance, only shows that his struggle, very relevant to Tiana, makes him in some ways pretty relatable. On top of the fact that, as most people online have talked about, he's got a great villain song. I mean, come on, those visuals are dope. What could you ask more from a Baron Samedi voodoo witch doctor Disney villain animated with traditional animation? It's just mind-blowing. That then brings us to Mama Odie, who as a character talks about what the characters need. And given with her song, which a lot of people haven't really talked about, but in my opinion is still a pretty good song. Let me scratch that off. All the songs in this movie are really good. But at the end of the day, Princess and the Frog is an amazing movie. I highly recommend you check it out on the big screen. It's got a good message in it, and more importantly, it's just got great animation. What's there to go wrong on? It's definitely worth it. But at the end of the day, what makes this movie work is the animation. This is one of the last Disney animated movies to be animated on paper. Granted, we have traditional animation that are done on Cintiq and tablets and Wacoms and whatnot, but no, they actually went out of their way to draw it on paper and then have it painted digitally, which is a pretty big deal. It shows that this technology still works in this day and age, but granted, with a lot of factors coming into play, I doubt we'll see it again. I think with Netflix putting in a lot of risks when it comes to traditional animation, it's worth seeing. Comment below, let me know what you think. It's fun making these videos. Do you like Princess and the Frog? Do you want to see traditional animation done by Disney again? Comment below and let me know what you think. I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P, and thanks for watching this review on the Cartoon Palooza.